Welcome back to the Deep Dive.
Great to be here.
Today, we are undertaking, well, a really critical mission, trying to crack the code on one of the most complex organizational challenges out there.
Which is?
How the U.S. Army manages its enormous enterprise. We're diving deep into Army resourcing and integration.
Yes, that's absolutely the core issue, because this is really where those, grand strategic plans think documents like the National Defense Strategy stuff.
Right.
They actually meet the hard realities of physics and finance.
Right.
It's this incredibly dense, sometimes bureaucratic process where limited resources get prioritized and then hopefully translated into actual combat power, the kind needed for global requirements.
So our goal for you, the listener, is pretty simple. We want to provide a shortcut to understanding this whole architecture.
A shortcut would be nice. This complex stuff.
Definitely. We're aiming to give you the essential nuggets of knowledge about strategy, budgeting, force structure, fielding. Basically, making sure you walk away understanding the engine that drives force modernization.
And to do that, we've based our analysis today on a stack of really informative sources.
Good. What do we look at?
We relied heavily on the core reading that details resourcing, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution.
Okay, the big one.
And its companion reading, which focuses entirely on force integration. Also pulled in a crucial article called Continuous Transformation.
That one highlights the tension, right? Between tech speed and bureaucracy.
Exactly. It provides that essential context. And then, just for a broader perspective, we also looked at those optional readings.
The ones on the Navy, Marine Corps, and Air Force processes.
Yeah, just to see how others approach similar problems. It helps frame the Army's way of doing things.
Okay, sounds like a solid foundation. Let's start unpacking this enormous process, maybe starting with the bedrock financial system. Planning, programming, budgeting, and execution.
Right. The planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system. And the better way to maybe grasp the sheer scale of the Department of Defense budget, it's hard to visualize, honestly, is through that analogy used in the source material.
The household analogy.
Exactly. Managing the Department of Defense is like managing an absolutely enormous household. You're not just paying for groceries week to week.
Right. There's more to it.
You've got short-term expenses like the electric bill.
Mm-hmm.
Then midterm needs maybe major vehicle maintenance or putting kids through college.
Okay.
And then you have these massive, decades-long requirements. Think mortgages on facilities or huge contracts for buying major equipment. It spans multiple time horizons.
And just like that huge household, the Department of Defense needs a system, something to manage its total income, what they call the total obligation authority, and make sure every single dollar gets pointed to the right program at the right time.
Absolutely. And the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system is that mechanism for management.
The engine.
It's the engine. And it's really crucial to understand that it's concurrent and cyclical. It never actually stops.
What do you mean never stops?
Well, while the current year's budget is being executed, money's being spent right now, the process for the budget, maybe 4 or 5 years down the road, is already underway. Planning for the future while managing the present.
Wow. Okay. Constant motion.
Constant motion. This continuity, it's designed intentionally to ensure stability and accountability, even across different administrations and Congresses.
Makes sense. So who's the conductor for this multi-year orchestra? Who's guiding the cycle?
Well, at the very top, the Department of Defense level, it's overseen by the Deputy Secretary of Defense.
Okay.
But within the Army specifically, the primary lead is the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Controller.
Got it. The ASA, FMC.
Right. Their fundamental goal is taking that strategic guidance, like the documents from the Army Strategic Planning System, translating those strategies into defined requirements.
Requirements.
Yeah, grouping those requirements into programs, and then prioritizing the limited resources to provide trained and ready units.
So it connects the big ideas to the actual troops and gear.
Essentially, yes. This whole system is how the Army fulfills its obligation to the nation, the one laid out in Title 10 of the U.S. Code. Providing forces.
And what are the tangible outputs? What documents come out of this massive rolling process?
There are two really essential outputs that define everything else that follows.
Okay.
First, there's the Future Years Defense Program. Think of it as the financial blueprint.
The long-range plan.
Exactly. It looks back 1 year, covers the current year, and then projects funding a full 5 years into the future. It shows the planned funding for, well, everything. New equipment, building things, people.
Yeah, the whole picture.
The whole financial picture, yeah.
Yeah.
And second, it produces the actual defense budget. That's the document ultimately submitted to Congress as part of the president's budget request, usually every February.
All right. Let's delve into phase one then, planning. Strategy gets written here, but how does the Army take that high-level direction and turn it into something, usable for the finance folks?
Planning is definitely the most conceptual phase. It takes things like the National Defense Strategy, the Defense Planning Guidance, other big directional
Yeah,
documents.
that top-level guidance.
Right. And it translates them into fiscally constrained guidance and priorities. It's really about answering the fundamental questions first.
Right.
Like, what military capabilities do we actually need? And just as importantly, what are the financial and political constraints we have to operate within? This phase is really about setting the boundaries, drawing the lines on the map.
And who leads that effort within the Army? Who sets the direction?
Within the Army, the organizational lead for this critical direction-setting phase is the Deputy Chief of Staff, G357.
Operations, plans, and training. Makes sense.
Yeah, they manage operations, plans, training. So they oversee the Army strategic planning system, and they prioritize the requirements that flow out of all that analysis.
So the result of planning is?
The key outcome is ensuring that every future program, every dollar spent down the line, is linked back to a defined strategic capability or priority from this phase.
Accountability.
Accountability. If a program can't justify its existence by linking back to this guidance, well, it gets identified for potential termination. That frees up resources for higher priorities.
And is there a key document that marks the end of planning?
Yes. The capstone document for this phase is the Army Structure Memorandum.
Okay.
This memorandum is basically the institutional outcome of a process called the Total Army Analysis.
What does it define?
It provides the baseline force structure. So how many units, what kind of people are authorized in those units, and what basic equipment they should have. That memorandum marks the hard transition into the second phase, programming.
Okay, so planning gives us the map, the strategy. The Army Structure Memorandum defines the vehicle we're driving the basic force. Now we move into phase two, programming. This sounds like where the money really starts getting allocated long-term.
That's a good way to put it. Programming is where the rubber starts to meet the road in terms of multi-year funding commitments.
And who leads programming?
This phase is led by the Deputy Chief of Staff, G8. They're the Army's lead for programming and resource requirements.
So G357 sets the stage, G8 builds the program.
Loosely speaking, yes. The G8's responsibility is identifying, prioritizing, and then resourcing actual capabilities across that long term. We talk about the Future Years Defense Program.
And this is where that rolling nature you mentioned really kicks in.
Absolutely. This is where you see it in action. For example, let's say we're currently executing the fiscal year 26 budget right now.
Okay.
Simultaneously, the G8 team is finalizing the Program Objective Memorandum, that's the Army's program proposal for fiscal years 28 all the way through 32.
Wow, constantly looking 5 years ahead of the next budget year.
Exactly. We're always working on that 5-year plan beyond the budget that's currently being debated or executed.
That sounds incredibly complex. How do you manage the sheer number of programs and maintain any kind of balance or clarity over that much time and money?
It is incredibly complex, and the sources point to the program evaluation groups as the key mechanism for trying to maintain sanity, as you put it.
Program evaluation groups, okay. How do they work?
They're the essential oversight bodies. The Army divides its resource management portfolio into 6 of these program evaluation groups.
Can you list them?
Sure, they are. Digital, installations, manning, sustaining, training, and equipping.
So covering all major areas.
Pretty much everything, yes. And these groups are co-chaired by senior leaders, usually members of the Secretariat, like an assistant secretary, and the appropriate Deputy Chief of Staff from the Army staff. For instance, the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology co-chairs the equipping group with the G8.
And their purpose.
Their purpose is rigorous oversight, making sure all the programs within their portfolio conform to the established requirements from the planning phase, and they strive for affordability, continuity, and balance across the entire Future Years Defense Program, trying to keep everything aligned.
Now, to manage this huge portfolio within those groups, the Army uses something called a Management Decision Execution Package. That sounds unique.
It is fairly unique to the Army, and it's a critical concept for understanding their resourcing structure. A Management Decision Execution Package is essentially a total description of a specific organization or a function or maybe a program.
A self-contained description.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And crucially, it captures all the associated resources for that thing. Funding, manpower authorizations, equipment, everything, over that entire multi-year future years defense program period.
All resources tied together.
All tied together in one package. So if you were to literally add up every single management decision execution package across the entire Army.
It would equal all Army resources.
Precisely. It provides complete resource accountability, at least on paper. Every dollar, every person should theoretically belong to one of these packages.
That takes us back to the household analogy you mentioned. If the kitchen is the management decision execution package, then all the individual bits, the cabinets needing procurement funds, the plumbing needing maybe sustainment funds, the wiring needing something else, those are what the Army calls Army program elements.
That's the idea. The individual components within the package are Army program elements, and they get funded by different appropriations, those different colors of money we'll talk about later.
So this structure allows that very granular level of detail needed to track specific dollars to specific functions over many years.
Yes, it allows the Army to manage its massive portfolio at that detailed level, even while these Army program elements get bundled up with elements from the Navy and Air Force to form the 12 major force programs used by the entire Department of Defense. It's layers within layers.
Layers indeed.
Yeah.
Now, before we move to the next phase, budgeting, those optional readings gave some interesting context on how other services handle this. The Air Force and Marine Corps seem to tweak the model slightly.
They do, and it's fascinating to compare. The Army sticks pretty closely to the classic four-phase planning, programming, budgeting, and execution cycle. But the Air Force, for example, explicitly adds a strategy phase right at the beginning.
Making it SPPBE.
Exactly. Strategy, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution. They put a heavy emphasis on foundational documents like their Air Force Strategic Master Plan right up front.
And how does that change their programming phase?
During programming, they use these specific decision constructs. They call them initiatives, disconnects, and offsets. It's a structured way to propose changes to the baseline program.
Initiatives are new things they want to start.
Right. Disconnects are capabilities they know are under-resourced and need more funding. And offsets are programs they are deliberately planning to cut or reduce to free up resources. It's a very explicit way of managing change within the program build.
Interesting. And the Navy and Marine Corps, they add something at the end.
They do. The Marine Corps in particular makes it planning, programming, budgeting, execution, and assessment, PPBEA.
Assessment. What does that involve?
For the Marines, the assessment phase is continuous. It runs alongside and monitors all the other phases. It evaluates how well the plans and programs are working, and it feeds that information directly back into the next program objective memorandum cycle.
So a built-in feedback loop.
A very explicit feedback loop designed to drive adaptation and responsiveness. Their final output is a force integration plan, approved by the commandant, with the clear goal of balancing warfighting needs against risk and affordability.
So while the Army uses the four-phase model, others are experimenting with adding explicit strategy or assessment phases.
Yes, but the common thread, really, across all the services is that constant search for balance. Balancing stability and predictability, which the multi-year system provides, against the absolute need to adapt and change in a dynamic world.
That search for balance, or maybe the difficulty of it, leads us right into Section 3, the reality of resourcing. This sounds like where the long-term plan meets the immediate near-term financial reality, the budgeting phase.
Exactly. This is where the plan hits the checkbook, so to speak. This phase is led by the director, Army Budget.
Which is part of the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Comptroller's Office.
Correct, a subordinate element. And the crucial task here in budgeting is reformatting those programs that were designed in the programming phase. Remember the Program Objective Memorandum?
Yeah, the 5-year plan.
Reformatting that plan into appropriations, legal buckets of money.
Appropriations. Okay, now we're talking about the famous colors of money. These are the legally binding funds Congress authorizes for specific purposes, right? And their lifespan is key.
It is arguably the most important limitation in the entire system. These appropriations aren't just suggestions, they are legal constraints. And the 5 main categories have fundamentally different rules, especially about when the money expires.
Which ones do we rely on most?
Day to day, the Army relies most heavily on funds for military personnel, paying soldiers in operations and maintenance. O&M is huge.
What does operations and maintenance cover?
Oh, everything from unit training, flying hours, depot maintenance, buying spare parts, base operations, utilities, the daily cost of running the Army.
And the catch.
The catch is, both military personnel and operations and maintenance funds generally expire in just 1 year. You have to obligate them, meaning sign a contract or place an order within that fiscal year, or you lose the money. It vanishes.
Wow. Use it or lose it, quite literally. Like the grocery budget you mentioned, you can't save this month's food money for next year's car.
Precisely. It forces spending within the year. Now, contrast that with the other major categories: procurement, research, development, test, and evaluation, or RDT&E, and military construction.
These are the longer-term funds.
Yes, these are generally considered capital investment funds. Procurement buys major end items like tanks or helicopters. RDT&E funds the development of new technologies. Military construction builds facilities. Because these involve major multi-year projects, the funds are available for longer.
How much longer?
Procurement funds typically last 3 years for obligation. RDT&E usually 2 years. Military construction funds last 5 years. This recognizes the longer timelines needed for big acquisition programs or building projects.
Okay, so the budgeting phase translates the program into these specific time-limited pots of money. Then what?
Then comes the political reality, the congressional hurdle. The entire defense budget, meticulously built through this internal process, must be submitted to Congress, justified in countless hearings, and ultimately approved.
And ideally, the appropriation bill, the spending law, and the authorization bill, the policy law, are signed by the president before October 1st.
That's the ideal, the start of the new fiscal year. But here we hit the critical limitation that our sources emphasize repeatedly. It's a monumental problem for planning and execution.
You're talking about continuing resolutions.
The elephant in the room.
Yeah.
Continuing resolutions, or CRs, this is when Congress doesn't pass the regular appropriations bills on time. Instead, they pass a temporary measure that usually just extends the previous year's funding levels, often with restrictions.
And the reading highlighted how common this has become.
Depressingly common. The reading on resourcing states that since 2010, the Department of Defense has started the fiscal year with a regular approved budget only once.
Only once in over a decade.
Only once, back in 2019. Every other year started under a continuing resolution. And these aren't short delays. They've delayed normal budget execution by anywhere from 76 days to, in some years, 216 days.
216 days. That's over 7 months into the fiscal year. It sounds like a temporary patch, but what's the real practical impact of operating under a continuing resolution for that long?
The impact is severe, and it cascades across the entire enterprise. First, a typical continuing resolution prohibits 3 key things: starting new programs, increasing production rates for existing programs, and usually ramping up research efforts.
So modernization just stops. New capabilities get stalled right out of the gate.
Immediately stalled, delivery schedules slip. Second, it causes massive internal friction and wasted effort. The Army and the whole Department of Defense consumes enormous amounts of time and manpower just preparing to operate under a continuing resolution. They have to develop alternate spending plans, figure out workarounds, and prepare special requests for exceptions, which they call anomalies, just to try and get permission to do things that were already in the planned budget.
So instead of focusing on training or readiness or modernization, leaders are spending time on these internal budget drills.
Exactly. Time, energy, and intellectual capital diverted to mitigating the effects of the continuing resolution itself. And think about the defense industry.
Yeah, what does it do to them?
It creates whiplash. Contracts can't be awarded on time. Production lines can't ramp up as planned. This leads to inefficiencies, potential workforce instability, and ultimately higher costs for the taxpayer down the road when things finally get sorted out.
And for the units, the soldiers.
If the continuing resolution drags on for months, the impacts become very real. Things like flying hours get cut because the operations and maintenance funding is frozen at last year's levels. Major depot maintenance schedules get delayed. Unit training events might be curtailed or canceled. Readiness degrades because those crucial one-year operations and maintenance dollars aren't flowing as planned.
So, as the source material implies, this chronic budget instability makes effective long-term resource management incredibly difficult, almost impossible sometimes.
Exponentially harder, yes. It injects massive uncertainty into a system designed for predictability.
Now, even within this rigidity, there's supposed to be some flexibility, right? A process called reprogramming. Can units move money around if unexpected needs pop up?
They can, yes, but flexibility is a very relative term here. Even reprogramming is heavily restricted, primarily because Congress maintains very strict oversight over how taxpayer money is spent. They hold the purse strings tightly.
So what are the main restrictions?
The biggest restriction involves moving money between different appropriations categories. Say, taking funds allocated for military personnel and trying to use them to buy equipment funded by procurement.
Different colors of money.
Exactly. That's called a transfer. And it's almost always strictly prohibited unless Congress gives prior, explicit written consent. That's a very high bar.
Okay, so transferring between accounts is tough. What about moving money within the same appropriation? Like more money for one operations and maintenance project by taking it from another?
That's called a realignment. And it is possible, but it's still subject to specific dollar thresholds set by the Congressional Defense Committees.
Thresholds.
Yes. For instance, if the Army wants to increase funding for a specific research development test and evaluation program element by more than, say, $10 million above what was justified to Congress, that requires formal congressional notification and usually approval.
Even if it's within the same RDT&E pot.
Even then. And even when that approval is likely, the process itself, preparing the justification, submitting it, waiting for committee action, typically takes about 3 months, according to the reading.
3 months?
In a crisis situation, or when you're dealing with rapidly evolving technology like we see today, 3 months can feel like an eternity. This inherent inflexibility, this slowness in moving funds, even when approved, is a primary constraint the Army faces when it tries to adapt or transform quickly.
Okay. So assuming the budget does eventually get approved, whether on time or after a continuing resolution, we finally move into phase 4, execution. This is where the money actually gets spent.
That's right, execution. This phase is again overseen by the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Financial Management and Controller. And execution is really where the strategy, the plans, the budgets, all that paperwork turns into reality on the ground.
Who's doing the spending?
Unit leaders at absolutely every level. From installation commanders managing base operations budgets to battalion and company commanders managing training funds or ordering repair parts, this is where responsible stewardship becomes a fundamental duty for every single leader entrusted with taxpayer dollars.
And is there a final check-in during this execution phase, a way to adjust course?
Yes, there's typically a mid-year review process. The Army Budget Office runs this review. They look at how funds are being spent, assess performance against goals, and identify any emerging unbudgeted needs.
And if priorities have shifted, maybe a new crisis flared up somewhere.
Exactly. If significant priorities have changed since the budget was built, the mid-year review is the primary opportunity to initiate that reprogramming process we just discussed, moving funds internally to address those new urgent requirements, within those congressional limitations, of course.
All right. So we've walked through the entire planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system. The strategy gets formulated, the long-range financial plan gets built, the budget gets approved eventually, and the money gets spent. But those funds are still just, numbers on a spreadsheet until they become actual trained soldiers and real equipment in the hands of units.
Precisely. And that critical translation piece, that delivery mechanism, is the realm of force integration.
Force integration. Okay, define that for us.
Force integration is the bridge. The reading defines it quite clearly as the synchronized, resource-constrained execution of force development plans. Its purpose is to manage change and deliver newly developed or modernized capabilities to the operating force, the soldiers in the field.
So it connects the planners and budgeters, the generating force, with the units that actually deploy and fight the operating force.
Exactly. It's the critical synchronization link between those two parts of the Army, making sure the right people, the right gear, and the right training come together at the right time and place.
And the scope of force integration sounds huge. The reading mentioned 9 distinct areas.
It really covers the entire waterfront of building and sustaining military readiness. Those 9 force integration function areas include structuring the force, designing units, manning them, assigning personnel, equipping them, providing material, training them, sustaining them, logistics and maintenance, deploying them, stationing them where units are based, funding them, ensuring resources flow correctly during integration, and importantly, minimizing any adverse impacts on readiness while all this change is happening.
That sounds incredibly complex to synchronize. Is there a key milestone they aim for?
Often, the synchronization of all these different elements revolves around one critical date, the organizational effective date, or E-date.
E-date.
That's the target completion date, when all the necessary personnel, material, facilities, and training are supposed to converge, resulting in a ready, transformed unit or capability.
Okay. Now, with limited resources, money, people, equipment, the Army can't modernize everyone at once. So how does it formally prioritize who gets what and when across the entire force?
Right. Prioritization is absolutely essential. The Army uses a clear hierarchy of documents to manage this.
Right.
The foundational document, the one that guides modernization strategy across the entire future years defense program, is called the Army Modernization Priority List.
AMPL, what does it do?
The Army Modernization Priority List synchronizes the resources allocated in the budget with the requirements identified in planning. It's designed explicitly to balance the risk between ensuring readiness for current operations today versus investing in readiness for potential conflicts tomorrow.
So a strategic balancing act.
A strategic list, yes. And that strategic list then informs a much more detailed operational level document.
Which is?
The Dynamic Army Resource Priority List, or DART-PL.
Dynamic meaning it changes.
Exactly. The Dynamic Army Resource Priority List gets down to the granular level. It provides the detailed unit-by-unit modernization prioritization for something like 7,500 Army units, each identified by its unique unit identification code.
7,500 units prioritized individually.
Individually. This list dictates the precise schedule for almost everything related to modernization and readiness for each unit. When does this brigade get its new command systems? When does that battalion's personnel fill rate increase? When does this division enter a specific training cycle to prepare for a potential mission? The DARPAL drives those decisions.
And who manages this dynamic list?
It's constantly updated, usually twice each fiscal year, by headquarters, Department of the Army specifically, the G357's Force Integration Division. They're the ones managing the flow based on strategic guidance and current readiness needs.
Okay, let's talk about one of the most constrained resources people. Personnel distribution. The reading made a clear distinction between spaces and faces. Can you explain that?
Yes, this is a fundamental concept in Army manning, and it's detailed well in the Force Integration reading. Spaces refer to the documented personnel authorizations.
The slots on the unit manning document.
Exactly. The required number and type of people for a unit to be at full strength on paper. This is primarily a force structure function managed by the Deputy Chief of Staff, G357.
And faces.
Faces are the actual soldiers, the real people, assigned to fill those authorized spaces. Managing the assignment of faces is the responsibility of the Deputy Chief of Staff, G1, the personnel community.
The big challenge, as the reading points out, is that the Army never has enough faces to fill all the spaces at 100%, right?
Correct. There's a structural reason for that. A significant portion of the Army's total strength is always unavailable for assignment to regular operating units.
Why is that?
It's due to what's called the Trainees, Transients, Holdees, and Students Account, or TTHS. This account holds soldiers who are in basic training or advanced individual training, those attending professional military education courses like officer or NCO schools, those who are in transit between assignments, or those perhaps on long-term medical hold.
So a large pool of people who are technically in the Army, but not available for unit duty.
Exactly. And that pool represents a significant chunk. The reading estimates around 13% of the total force strength at any given time. Since those soldiers aren't physically available to fill unit slots, the Army simply cannot fill every unit to 100% of its authorized spaces.
Which means they must have a system to prioritize who gets filled first.
They absolutely must. And that prioritization system is formalized in the Active Component Manning Guidance.
Okay, the ACMG. Who approves it and what does it do?
It's approved by the Deputy Chief of Staff, G3, the Operations and Plans lead. This document provides specific direction to the G1, the personnel managers, on how to allocate the available soldiers the faces across the force. It uses 4 main categories.
What are the categories?
The highest priority is Category ASL Directed Fill. These are specific positions or units that senior Army leadership, the ASL mandates, must be filled at 100%, no exceptions. Often includes critical enabling functions like recruiting organizations.
Makes sense. What's next?
Next is Category A. These are typically units assigned against the highest national requirements, like globally responsive contingency forces. They get prioritized fill. Then comes Category B, units needed to support major regional conflicts or provide follow-on forces. And finally, Category C covers the remaining units, those supporting day-to-day operations, security cooperation missions, and the institutional base.
So this guidance ensures that the limited number of available soldiers are assigned first to the units deemed most critical based on current strategy and operational demands.
That's the intent, to strategically manage the inherent gap between spaces and faces.
Okay, so we've prioritized the people. How does the new equipment, the material, get distributed according to these priorities?
Equipment distribution is another massive undertaking. The primary organization responsible is Army Material Command. They serve as the designated lead material integrator for the entire Army.
Lead material integrator, so they manage the flow of all equipment.
Essentially, yes. They're responsible for distributing all the new equipment coming off production lines, any recapitalized or refurbished equipment, and also for redistributing existing equipment from units that might have excess to units that have critical shortages. It's a constant balancing act.
How do they track all that across 7,500 units?
They use a collaborative software tool called the Decision Support Tool. This provides a common operating picture, everyone looking at the same data regarding equipment status and requirements across the globe.
Where does the data come from?
The tool pulls data automatically from various Army logistics information systems, property books, maintenance records, etc. It then compares that current status against the requirements driven by the prioritization lists we discussed, like the Dynamic Army Resource Priority List and also the Army's overall readiness model.
To find the best solution for shortages.
Exactly. It analyzes shortages and helps decision makers determine the optimal sourcing solution, whether to issue new gear, transfer existing gear, or prioritize repair to improve overall equipment readiness across the force, in line with Army priorities.
That sounds like it requires a lot of high-level coordination. Are there specific forums where these decisions are made?
Yes, this complex decision-making happens primarily in two major forums.
Okay, what are they?
First, at the strategic level, there's the Army Modernization and Equipping Conference, or AME. This meets semi-annually.
Who attends?
It's co-chaired by very senior leaders, the Deputy Chief of Staff, G8, Requirements Resourcing, the Commanding General of Army Material Command, Logistics Sustainment, and the Assistant Secretary of the Army for Acquisition, Logistics, and Technology. Acquisition technology. They address the big strategic equipping issues and ensure that the fielding schedules for new modernized equipment are perfectly synchronized with the phases of the Army's readiness model.
High-level synchronization. What's the second forum?
The second forum is more tactical, operating at the unit level. It's called the Unit Equipping Reuse Working Group, or UERWG.
Reuse Working Group.
Yes. This is typically held at the division or major command level. It's a very pragmatic, hands-on process focused on filling immediate, essential equipment shortages for units that are preparing for upcoming deployments or major training events.
How do they do that?
Primarily by identifying excess equipment within the division or command and directing internal transfers cross-leveling assets to fill the most critical gaps in the deploying or training units. It's about optimizing readiness, using the equipment already on hand within that command.
Got it. So we have these complex systems for prioritizing and distributing people and equipment, and all these integration efforts, manning, equipping, training, sustaining, they all need to fit into the Army's overall plan for generating ready forces, right?
Absolutely. They are all nested within the Army's current force generation model.
Which is?
It's called the Regionally Aligned Readiness and Modernization Model, or RERM.
Rearmament. What's the goal of that?
RERM is the framework the Army uses now to try and achieve better operational balance and predictability for soldiers and units. This has been a huge focus for Army leadership recently.
Predictability in what sense?
The intent is to provide units, and the soldiers in them, with more predictable, dedicated periods for different activities. Periods focused on assigned missions, periods dedicated to high-intensity collective training, and importantly, protected periods focused specifically on modernization and individual soldier readiness tasks.
Trying to reduce that constant churn and back-to-back deployment.
Exactly. Trying to build in time for units to properly reset, train, modernize, and prepare for their next mission cycle in a more sustainable way. And REARM is directly linked to those prioritization lists. The detailed readiness data and mission requirements coming out of the REARM cycle directly inform the updates to the Dynamic Army Resource Priority List. And conversely, the priorities set in the Dynamic Army Resource Priority List influence when a unit is scheduled for its modernization window within the REARM cycle. It creates that essential synchronization loop between readiness generation and resource allocation.
Okay. We've really established just how detailed and, frankly, how rigid the multi-year planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system is designed to be, and how massive the task of force integration is, synchronizing all those pieces.
That's a behemoth.
But that article, Continuous Transformation, throws a major wrench into this picture. It highlights this core dilemma. The entire financial and integration architecture we just described seems to move at a, well, snail's pace compared to the actual speed needed in modern warfare.
That's the fundamental conflict, isn't it? It's the speed of the bureaucracy versus the speed of technological change and adaptation on the battlefield. And as that source material starkly points out, this transformation isn't happening in a vacuum. It's occurring in contact.
Meaning?
Meaning the Army has to do three things simultaneously. It must sustain current global operations, generate ready forces for today's commitments using the existing systems, and transform itself into a more capable future force, all at the same time. You can't just pause operations to modernize.
That sounds incredibly difficult. How does the article suggest managing that pace?
It categorizes the transformation effort into 3 distinct time horizons, which helps frame the challenge.
What are they?
First, there's transformation in contact. This is the most urgent, focusing on identifying and rapidly fielding capabilities needed in less than 24 months.
Things needed right now based on battlefield lessons.
Exactly. Addressing immediate threats and opportunities seen in current conflicts. Think rapid drone adaptation, for example. Second, you have deliberate transformation.
That sounds more planned.
It is. This covers the 2 to 7 year window. Notice how that time frame aligns almost perfectly with the multi-year defense budget planning cycle we discussed.
Ah, the future years defense program window.
Precisely. This deliberate effort is focused on developing and fielding the capabilities needed to realize the Army's midterm modernization goals, like the Army 2030 concept. And finally, there's concept-driven transformation.
Looking further out.
Much further. This is a long-term vision, driven by concepts about the future character of warfare. It's aimed at developing the capabilities needed for, say, Army 2040 and beyond, based on things like the forthcoming Army warfighting concept.
Okay, 3 horizons. But the article really emphasizes the friction, especially with that first category, transformation in contact. The fundamental obstacle seems to be fiscal agility or the lack thereof.
That's the heart of the problem identified in the reading. Physical agility. The system we've described, planning, programming, budgeting, and execution, takes, on average, about 2 years just to formally approve a new requirement and secure the initial funding to start working on it.
2 years from idea to initial funding.
Roughly. But look at the speed of technology, especially in areas relevant to modern conflict. The article used the example of drone warfare in the conflict in Ukraine. Commercial drone technology reportedly went through 4 distinct generations of adaptation and counter-adaptation in the first 2 years of that large-scale conflict.
4 generations in the time it takes the Army just to get initial funding for one system.
That's the mismatch. The planning, programming, budgeting, execution system, which is meticulously designed for predictability, accountability, and stability over the long haul, moves glacially compared to the speed of commercial innovation and battlefield adaptation.
The reading used that iPod versus smartphone illustration, which really drove it home for me.
That's a perfect analogy for this rigidity, isn't it? By the time the Army goes through the lengthy process of documenting a very specific, rigid requirement for, say, a military-grade handheld communication device,
Like the iPod.
funds it through the multi-year budget cycle, completes the extensive development, testing, and fielding process, the commercial smartphone market might have already gone through 3 or 4 iterations. The military system, designed years earlier, could be functionally obsolete or significantly less capable than readily available commercial tech by the time it finally reaches soldiers in large numbers.
So that example highlights that the requirements process itself, when it's too specific and rigid up front, becomes the bottleneck.
It absolutely does. If the Army waits for perfect, detailed requirements definition and total understanding of a technology before starting the funding process, they are simply waiting too long in many rapidly evolving tech areas. The article argues the process must fundamentally shift. It needs to find ways to fund capabilities or problem sets before the specific materials solution is fully understood or defined, simply to keep pace with innovation and allow for experimentation.
But wait, the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system is built on accountability back to Congress. How can the Army achieve that kind of agility funding something before it's fully defined without losing the trust of Congress and the taxpayers? That seems like a major hurdle.
It is the major hurdle. And the proposed solution discussed in the continuous transformation reading revolves around what he calls the formation-based solution.
Formation-based, meaning focusing on the unit, not just the gear.
Exactly. Instead of developing those hyper-specific, rigid requirements, documents for a particular type of system, say, a specific sensor payload for a specific model of drone, the argument is that the Army must shift to developing requirements for a capability.
Like what? Give me an example.
Like a capability for short-range reconnaissance and strike for infantry platoons. That's broader, less tied to one piece of hardware. This broader definition allows for more flexibility in how that capability is delivered. It allows for iterative fielding of different solutions.
And this connects to funding, too.
Yes, the article suggests this shift supports moving towards a capability portfolio model for funding and management. Instead of funds being rigidly tied to one specific Army program element for one black box, you manage a portfolio of funds dedicated to achieving that broader capability, allowing more flexibility to shift resources to the most promising solutions as you learn.
Okay, so shifting from system requirements to capability requirements and focusing on the formation. How does that help?
Focusing on the formation forces a more holistic view from the start, because as the reading emphasizes, equipment alone doesn't equal capability. A new drone isn't a capability by itself.
Right, you need more than just the hardware.
You need people, soldiers, who are properly organized into units, trained on how to use the equipment and integrate it, equipped not just with the drone, but the controllers, the comms, the power sources, all supported by the right doctrine, leadership, personnel policies, facilities, everything. That whole package, doctrine, organization, training, material, leadership and education, personnel, facilities, and policy, that's what delivers capability.
DOTMLPFP.
Right. If you focus the requirement and the resource planning on the formation, achieving a capability, you are forced to consider and budget for all those enabling elements much earlier in the process, not just the shiny new piece of hardware.
And this holistic formation-based approach seems evident in the Army's current focus on things like human-machine integrative formations.
Absolutely. That initiative, which is getting a lot of attention, is a prime example. The goal isn't just to buy robots. It's about iteratively fielding robotic and autonomous systems alongside human soldiers within existing formations, like brigade combat teams.
Why iteratively?
Because the goal is to figure out how these systems can best offload physical risk and cognitive load from soldiers. Let the machines do the dull, dirty, dangerous work so that the humans can focus on higher-level tasks. Judgment, ethical decision-making, adapting tactics, the art of command. You can't figure that out perfectly on paper beforehand.
So you have to field it and learn.
You have to field it, experiment, get soldier feedback, and adapt quickly. This requires that iterative fielding approach the article talks about.
What does that look like practically? How does iterative fielding work?
It might mean that version 1.0 of a new robotic system gets put into, say, one specific brigade combat team for immediate operational use and feedback collection. While they're using V1.0, maybe version 2.0, incorporating initial lessons learned, is already undergoing rigorous trials at a combat training center. And based on that feedback, version 3.0 is already on the drawing board being designed by the engineers and scientists.
Constant cycles of fielding, feedback, and improvement.
Constant structured collaboration between the warfighters using the tech, the scientists developing it, and the acquisition professionals funding and procuring it. This allows the Army to identify and discard bad ideas quickly, continuously improve the holistic capability, the robot plus the trained soldiers plus the doctrine, and integrate it effectively as it evolves, rather than waiting years for a supposedly perfect solution.
That approach, getting a minimum viable product into soldiers' hands quickly, even if it's not perfect and only in small numbers initially, seems like a complete reversal of the traditional defense acquisition model, which often strives for that perfect 100% solution before fielding anything.
It really is a culture shift, and it has to be. The Continuous Transformation article puts it bluntly, perfect is the enemy of good enough. In rapidly changing areas, waiting for perfect means falling behind. This iterative methodology not only accelerates technology development and integration, but crucially, it develops a generation of soldiers and leaders who grow up expecting to adapt to and employ evolving technology as part of their profession.
Like learning to integrate tanks or airplanes a century ago.
Exactly. It becomes an institutional capability, an adaptive mindset, not just a one-time hardware update.
Yeah.
And that adaptability might be the most important capability of all for the future.
Wow. Okay, we have definitely completed our deep dive today into the massive, complex resource engine of the Army. We navigated the detailed, sometimes rigid structure of the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system.
The system that translates strategy into that multi-year financial blueprint and eventually the annual budget request.
Right. And then we transitioned into force integration, that absolutely essential delivery mechanism that tries to synchronize the people, the equipment, and the training.
Governed by those dynamic documents like the Dynamic Army Resource Priority List and the Active Component Manning Guidance, all trying to deliver ready forces according to plan.
The sheer complexity is clearly necessary for managing such a vast enterprise and ensuring accountability to the taxpayer. But as we discussed, that very complexity creates immense friction against the need for speed and adaptation driven by technological change.
That tension we highlighted right at the end, that mismatch between the roughly 2-year resource cycle lock-in of the planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system, and the sometimes 3-month technology refresh cycle seen in the commercial world or on the battlefield, that really is the central defining challenge for the Army's future transformation efforts.
And the potential solution seems to lie in fundamentally shifting the focus, moving away from rigid, system-based requirements towards more agile, capability-based portfolios.
And focusing resource investment on the holistic formation, the integrated package of people, gear, training, and doctrine as the true object of modernization, not just the individual piece of equipment.
It definitely sounds like a necessary shift.
It does. And while the Army undeniably possesses sound, systematic processes honed over decades, the single most decisive point for actually changing the Army at scale and speed seems to be ensuring that the plan, the required capabilities, are fully captured and articulated early on in the Army Structure Memorandum and the Program Objective Memorandum, but with enough inherent flexibility built in to accommodate that necessary speed of adaptation.
Which brings us to our final thought for you, our listeners, to reflect on. Given the inherent necessary rigidity of the multi-year planning, programming, budgeting, and execution system designed for stability and accountability, and given the demonstrated speed of technological advancement that demands transformation and contact, what specific actionable process reform, perhaps going beyond just shifting focus from systems to capabilities, might best increase the Army's fiscal agility, allowing it to fund innovation faster, while still maintaining that essential accountability to Congress and the American people?
That's the multi-billion-dollar question, isn't it? Something to ponder. Thank you for joining us for the deep dive.
We'll catch you next time.